the two that I campaigned on are getting control of the failed policies of this current administration, of the Biden administration, economically, and get us back, get control of inflation, get us back on a sound fiscal footing, get us back to spending less money. And it's going to be that's going to be a gigantic task that Congress has to do. So that, and I think getting control of the border and border security, that's what the American people have asked for. It's what they've demanded in this election, and that's what the mandate was all about. And on the spending stuff, David, we've got some tough challenges ahead. The first thing that Congress has to do is, are they going to reauthorize the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act? That President Trump's tax cuts from when he was president before, they all expire.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Welcome to the American Potential Podcast. My name is David Fromm, and I'm the new host of the podcast. You all have gotten to know Jeff Crank for almost 2 years now, and he has talked to activists who are making a difference in their community, to policy experts looking for solutions to problems, and to lawmakers working on legislation that will improve people's lives. And that is why this podcast has a new host. Jeff is now one of those lawmakers. At the beginning of last year, Jeff and his family made the decision that he would run for Congress in his home state of Colorado. After winning his primary and then the general election, he will now be representing Colorado's 5th congressional district in Washington, D.C. With this bittersweet change to the podcast, we want to have Jeff and myself sit down and talk about his decision to run, as well as letting me try to get a few pointers from him. So, Jeff, I guess welcome to your podcast. I'm so thrilled to be sitting here with you and so excited for this big change in your life and for the change of the podcast, too. And I'm super excited. So, I mean, maybe just go back to the beginning. I know you've run for Congress before.
Yeah.
And so, why did you make a decision to run again?
Well, first of all, thank you, David. You're going to do an amazing job. They no longer have the weight of me holding this podcast down. So it's going to take off even more. But I really appreciate the opportunity and the time, but mostly the friendship over the years. I mean, we've been friends since really who came first? Did I come first?
Yep.
Barely.
I don't know. You're definitely before me.
Okay, I was definitely before
honestly,
you.
like when I joined Americans for Prosperity, you were the Colorado state director, and you were one of the guys we looked up to, who kind of knew what they were doing.
Well, regardless, it's been over a dozen years, right, that we've been working together at Americans for Prosperity. So for me, it's great. You asked why I ran for Congress, and the answer is I only lose my mind about every 18 years and decide to do something crazy. And that's run for Congress, because I ran 18 years ago as well. No, look, I mean, I looked around, and we've been in this fight a long time. And I thought to myself, if good people don't step up and run for office, bad people will. It's much like the world, right? If good countries don't spread goodness around the world, freedom and liberty around the world, and I'm not talking about getting in wars and stuff like that, but I'm just talking about if we're not there to lead and show the way about why freedom and liberty is the best way to run a society, then bad actors, bad people will step in and fill that void, and they'll, the dictators and the bad people will come in and take away freedom. So I look at it really the same way, that if I didn't step up, somebody else would. And I didn't want those people to step up and lead. So for me, it was kind of like this fight that I've been in for liberty and freedom for years. If I wasn't willing to run, then what was the point of all of it? Because if you're not willing to step in when you need to do that, then the whole point of the fight that you've been in all those years is pointless.
Well, I remember in January of this year, you being on a phone call with two of our former colleagues and good friends, and just talking to us about your decision-making process, and how you were trying to come up with whether or not to do it or not. And one of the things that stuck out to me, which I think really speaks to you, was, we talked a little bit about hey, the Lord puts you in different situations, and if we believe that like we can do good in this world and he wants us to do good in this world, like Jeff, if you're set up to be in this situation and make that kind of a difference for your community and for your country, like maybe you have an obligation, or maybe, you really need to seriously consider about taking that plunge and doing that. So, as now it's come to fruition, like you're going to be a member of Congress, and there's some, we're often critical or flipped sometimes about that, but it's a very weighty responsibility. So like, how do you kind of reflect on that? And like, what do you think about that kind of as you go on the journey now? Yeah.
Well, you know me well enough to know, and I know you're the same way, that we're both people of faith, right? And that we're put in positions. And, I don't want to, I always say to people, I'm not so arrogant as to assume that like, God endorsed me for Congress. He didn't, right? But he loves me, right? In a way that he loves everyone. And he wants what's best for me and wants what's best for the country. So as I was looking at that, and I've since reflected on that, I ended up obviously making the decision to do it. And there's sacrifice in that for sure. It's a great honor, such an honor to be elected to Congress by your neighbors, by 750, 800,000 of your closest friends and neighbors who say, we're going to send that guy right there to go represent our interests in Congress. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I got to thinking about timing and the timing of it. And as you know, I ran 18 years ago and was unsuccessful. And of course I was disappointed. But just recently I watched a documentary on Ronald Reagan. And it really struck me that you're put in positions, and this is just my faith that teaches me this. I think that God puts you in positions when he needs you there, and his timing is his timing, and I can't mess with it. I might try to mess with it. I might think that I know what's best for my life, but I have to ultimately just kind of ride down the river, right, and see what happens. But I looked at this documentary on Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan, as you know, ran in 1976 for president. There were 2,000 votes at the Republican convention, and Ronald Reagan lost by about, I think it was like 96 votes. So essentially, if 50 people would have voted the other way, Ronald Reagan would have been president or would have lost to Jimmy Carter, one of those two outcomes, in 1976. But let's assume that Reagan won in 76. He would have served 4 years, and then best case scenario would have gotten reelected in 1980 and served till 1984 when term limits kicked in and he would have had to leave. Mikhail Gorbachev came along in 1986, right? Mikhail Gorbachev, tear down this wall, right? They brought the Cold War to an end together. Those two people never would have happened if 50 people would have switched their vote and voted for Reagan in 1976, right? So you can do the timing however you want. You can think you're in control, but you're not in control. And that's just sort of the way I look at it. So maybe I'm crazy, but history has a funny way of writing those chapters.
Yeah, that's a pretty great thought exercise to think through.
Isn't it?
My own personal way, if you'd run for Congress and if you'd won when you first ran for Congress, I would have never met you.
That's right.
And I would have been blessed by my friendship with Jeff Crank and probably never been on podcasts either.
And look, and I think that's all true. I mean, that's all true. And I've always gone through life. Look, you can take defeats like that and you can be bitter about them. You can think that it's going to be, crushing to you or whatever. But look, life is filled with, and you've heard me say this, I've said this on the podcast. I mean, you can be a victim or a victor, right? And you can sit and say, woe is me. Or you can go and say, okay, I learned from that experience. I'm gonna refine what I did. And if you're doing that, you're growing, you're moving, and you're going to be better for it.
Yeah. True words, man. Well, so like running for Congress, people see it in the media. It's often not quite represented correctly, and in whether it's a sitcom or a movie. But so like maybe tell folks a little bit of like what goes into running for Congress and your experience, especially since you're working a full-time job while you're running for Congress. Yeah. How'd you balance all that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, very compliantly first and foremost, but Americans for Prosperity was very kind to me, right? I took PTO when I needed to go do things, on the campaign. And so it was just a balancing act, but they made it possible. And not every employer would do that. Then not everyone would be so understanding and good. But I think they looked at it as an opportunity to say, hey, kind of the way I did. Like if we don't do this, are we really committed to the cause in taking that next step and allowing someone to run for Congress or run for office or whatever? So it's sort of been an evolution, I think, for the organization as well. Yeah. As for me, it's such a humbling experience to run. There's so much. The first day you announce, and then 10 minutes later, you're like, what did I just do? I mean, I had, I didn't have anybody there to help really. I just made the decision and we were in, and you just kind of build it as you go. And it's quite an operation from start to finish but exhilarating for sure. I mean, I enjoy always meeting people, met awesome people along the way, and just really wouldn't trade the experience for anything. I mean, it's just an amazing experience.
Any people or experiences stick out to you while you were campaigning?
Oh, sure. I mean, just some great ones. Probably, just thinking, I love kids, as you know. I just think kids always tell the truth, and sometimes too much truth. But, just so many times, I remember meeting a family and some young kids. They had a couple of young kids, and the little boy came up to me and he just said, they're going to sell my future. Like, I need someone who will go and represent me, and that's ultimately what it's about. Like, we're making all these decisions, and it's about, do we spend X amount on this or X amount on that? And ultimately it gets down to who's thinking about that kid's future, who's thinking about something way down the road and can try and be their advocate. Right. And we talk about it all the time on this podcast. I met a lady one time who just came up and she said, look, the government's I can't buy a car. And we've talked about that so many times on this podcast, that the reason she can't buy that car is the government, right? Yeah. The government is forcing auto manufacturers to be, have certain fuel efficiency standards and safety standards and all these other things that are put on a car. So an F-150 pickup truck now is $150,000, right? So how does that lady afford a new car for her family? That's her real impact. And who's her lobbyist, right? All the green energy companies, they've got lobbyists. Mm-hmm. All the motor carriers, they have, the auto manufacturers, they have lobbyists. Who's her lobbyist, right? She can't go hire one. So who's there to represent her and the things that she do? So you meet people like that, and it just really has an impact on you. That's great.
So you also probably had a chance to meet a lot of your future colleagues.
Yeah.
Whether campaigning for you or afterwards, before. I mean, any stick out to you individually or collectively? Do you have any impressions about, your members of Congress?
Yeah. So first of all, it's truly weird to walk in because, I'm a pretty deferential person, right? I always call someone, congressman or, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, or whatever. And I still call the speaker or the leadership by their title. But the expectation now is just like all of a sudden you're elected to Congress and now they all expect you to know their first name. So you call them all by their first name, which is weird because I'm just Jeff. I mean, that's all I am. And, here I am talking to some member of Congress that I've seen on TV. Darrell Issa came up to me. It's so interesting as a freshman, incoming freshman. So I went through orientation a few weeks back, and there were a ton of members there, right? And we had conference meetings and stuff. So it was all of the Republican caucus members, for instance, at some of the meetings. And almost everybody to a T, very, very nice. I did hear stories. I don't know if I never ran into this person, but there was supposedly one member who said, well, until you've been here 6 years, I don't even need to know your name, which is just sort of kind of arrogant, right? That somebody would say
I'm
that.
sure they're a popular one.
Yeah, right. but I never met whoever that was, or I never met anybody like that. But supposedly there are people like that. But I was just standing there after, like in a break, and Daryl Issa just walked up to me and walks up and goes, "Hey, I'm Daryl." And I said, "Oh, hey, Mr. Issa, big fan of yours. Like, what do you say?" I mean, he did all those investigations and did so much. And, but he was just very kind, offering, his thoughts and ideas on. And I said, "What advice do you have for an incoming member?" And he sort of gave me different bits of advice, but, people are very kind. So I see that. I mean, to be honest with you, the person I'm very impressed with as a human being, right, is Mike Johnson. Speaker Mike Johnson is, such a genuinely nice person. And we have a colleague at AFP who knows him very well and served with him in the legislature and told us that. I saw Scott, that colleague of ours, last night, and told him, he said, "Oh man, Mike Johnson is such a good man." But he truly is. You can just tell at his core, he is here to help save America. And he views everybody who is here at this moment that they were sort of chosen to be here. This is our moment and we have to seize it. And so, just really impressed with, I think, his ethics, his approachableness, his faith. I mean, he sees faith in everything. He talked to, every time he tells the story that when he talks to President Trump, it's very obvious to me that Mike Johnson's trying to get President Trump to see the faith side of what he's doing right now. That, like, he's like, "Mr. President, when that bullet whipped by your ear, you didn't just turn your head. Like, God turned your head because, you have a special role in what's happening here." And so it's really neat to see that faith that a lot of people say they have. Mm-hmm. A guy like Mike Johnson truly has it.
I myself have worked on a lot of campaigns, been around a lot of elected officials, members of Congress, worked for them too. I've always found that, especially individually, there's a lot of good people serving this country, even though we like to bash politicians. And look, there's plenty of bad apples.
Yeah, of course.
There's bad folks. But I've always been surprised as to how many good people there are serving. And I think one of the roles maybe a group like Americans for Prosperity can play is to help make it easier to do the right thing. By mobilizing the voices of those folks you were talking about who want to buy a car but can't. But, we can elevate those voices to make those good people, provide the incentives for those good people to do the right thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think, Congress is like anything else. It's like America. It's like if you worked at a supermarket, most of the employees are good employees, probably not going to steal, but there'll probably be one or so out of your supermarket employees that's probably going to pull something out of the cash register, right? So Congress is that way as well. I think it's generally good people trying to do their best. There's people with egos, people without egos. There's, just like all these different personalities. But I would say this, the media is always going to focus on the member of Congress who cheats on his wife or does something dumb or steals, right? From your home state of Illinois, Dan Rostenkowski and the post office scandal, right? I was thinking of that the other day. Like, there were 434 other members of Congress who didn't do that, right?
Well, I mean, there's a long line of unethical behavior in Illinois politicians.
I could have grabbed any of them.
Unfortunately, I've worked for had two bosses who went to jail. That's no reflection on me.
No, that means you're from Illinois, right? Well, I mean, I look at it as the media is always going to focus on that. They're not going to talk about the member of Congress who doesn't cheat on his wife. That's not a story, right? Even though that might be the vast majority of members of Congress or the vast majority of the workers at that supermarket. They're going to always pick the story that, sells magazines.
Yeah. So what issues are you most focused on? Well,
I mean, obviously, the two that I campaigned on are getting control of the failed policies of this current administration, of the Biden administration, economically, and get us back, get control of inflation, get us back on a sound fiscal footing, get us back to spending less money, and that's going to be a gigantic task that Congress has to do. So that. And I think getting control of the border and border security, that's what the American people have asked for. It's what they've demanded in this election. And that's what the mandate was all about. And on the spending stuff, David, we've got some tough challenges ahead. The first thing that Congress has to do is, are they going to reauthorize the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act? The President Trump's tax cuts from when he was president before, they all expire. There'll be $4.5 trillion increase in taxes on the American people if Congress does nothing, right? And so we've got to come together and do that. But when we do that, what do? We just added $4.5 trillion in debt if we don't also fix spending. And so to me, those things have to go hand in hand. Because of the way the process works, we may have to authorize that first and do the tax cut stuff first and then come back and do the spending. But we can't not do that. I mean, it is the moment that we can save America. And if we don't do this and we don't pull us back from the pre-COVID, back to pre-COVID spending levels and below that even, and then do, things like entitlement reform and mandatory spending and stuff like that, we're going to have problems.
I actually was pretty encouraged on the spending front that President Trump appointed Elon Musk and Vivek to form Doge.
Yeah.
I don't know how effective they'll be or not, but even just as an indication of priorities, I thought it was a very good step forward because no one has wanted to do anything about spending in a few decades, it seems like.
Yeah. Well, I talked about Ronald Reagan before. I mean, you look back on the Reagan term, and I'm a Reagan person, right? I mean, I loved Ronald Reagan, both his character and, the presence and all of that, his policies. But at the end of the day, we spent too much money. And that's a problem, right? And so nobody's dealt with it. No Republicans dealt with it. No Democrats dealt with it. And it's really time. It's past time that we do this. We saw what happened in Greece with austerity measures. Like, the day is coming where we have to deal with this. And the further we push it down the road on debt, the more difficult it's going to be to get it under control without causing severe pain to the American people. So let's deal with it now, where the pain's still going to be there, but it's not going to be as major as it will be in 5 years or 10 years.
So you spent about 18 years, you said, in public policy. So since you ran for Congress the first time.
Yeah.
How's that shaped or changed you and as far as being a member of Congress?
Yeah. Well, I think it's, it's allowed me to sort of refine the way that I see things. I think the way that the network and Americans for Prosperity phrases things a lot of times is a good way, like to phrase it in government creating barriers, because truly that is what happens, right? Government creates barriers to people's success. And we don't want to choose what success means. We want to let you decide what success means, but then we want to remove the barriers that stand in your way for that. And so the only way to do that is to make government smaller. And the smaller government is, the bigger the individual is, as we know. So, to me, I think it's really helped me understand that and see it in a broader sense. And I can almost put everything in those buckets now, right? Every decision that I'll make in Congress, you really have to ask that. Am I creating more barriers? Is it constitutional? Is what I'm doing constitutional? Is it going to spend a ton of money, or is it going to cut money? And then is it going to create more barriers for success for the American people, or is it going to create fewer barriers? And if you just look at it and break it down, I think it's really almost that simple, but we've made it too difficult as we talk about it and vote on it right now. So to me, it kind of simplifies it.
Well, as we're wrapping up, not only this podcast, but like your time on the American Potential podcast that you and your team here have built. I mean, tell me, how have you felt about working on the podcast?
Yeah.
And are there any favorite moments or interviews or anything?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's been such a joy. I mean, you saw from sort of the sidelines as this thing was built, how we did it, right? And I always talk about this was the idea of John Quick from Alaska, a guy from Nikiski, Alaska. I mean, who even knows somebody that's ever been to Nikiski, Alaska? Me neither. Well, but John came up with the idea, and he says to me, and of course I'd spent 14 years on air doing radio, and he just said, hey, why doesn't AFP have a podcast? That simple question of why doesn't AFP have a podcast? Good question, John. What are you thinking? And he said, well, we ought to have a podcast. You should host it and all that. I said, let me go talk to Emily. Well, we took it and we took the idea to Emily, and to her credit, she took the risk to do it. She could have said, oh, you guys are crazy or whatever, but she let the team go. She's never called and said, hey, I didn't like this episode, or I didn't like the way you did this, or you should do it this way. She let us go and explore and do great things. And, you know, Monica has been amazing. The work that she does before I sit down in that chair to record an episode is incredible. I mean, whether it's the scheduling, the pre-interview, the episode brief, all of that stuff, she does an amazing job on it of telling those stories. And, you know, we have to do so many of them. We do 3 a week generally, and that's a lot of work to do that. It's just a grind. So there's that. Then there's the promotion of it, and that's all John Quick and from Nikiski, Alaska. And you just think of that, and John has done such an amazing job to have the millions of views, downloads that we have had in the last 2 years. It's just incredible. So I'm going to miss it for sure. It's just been a wonderful thing to be a part of. And I hope you guys will have me back as a guest from time to time. I'll be that guy begging to come on. Come on, David, let me on the podcast.
Well, I'm sure we can make some room. Look, I want to tell you, like, I'm so honored to be kind of taken off or taking on this responsibility where you leave off. And this team that you've built is amazing. And we're going to keep hopefully growing this and kind of spreading the good word about like the extraordinary things people can do. And any quick pointers while we wrap up?
I wouldn't say that I have pointers for you. You're going to do great. My pointers are this. I predict you're going to do great. And over the next couple of years, we're going to see this podcast really take off. I mean, it's going to be millions and millions of downloads in my view. And you're just going to do awesome. Just keep the content coming. Keep the stories of the American people coming. And make sure you take care of Monica and John. If you do that, I think you're going to be in good shape. All
right. That's a great charge. I'm sure we can do that. Jeff, I so appreciate you being here, being a friend, and what you've done for Americans for Prosperity and for this podcast too. So thanks so much.
Hey, David, thank you. You're going to do great. And make sure you invite me back.
Yeah, we certainly will.
Okay.
So, well, hey, everybody. As Jeff is always fond of saying, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend liberty and freedom. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.